Thank you so much for joining us today for our last Wednesday webinar for 2025. I am Nick Stout, the IR Communications Director. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know there's a few more folks coming in, but we'll just kind of keep the meeting rolling. I know some of you have a very busy day this afternoon, so I don't want to keep you waiting too long. I would like to welcome our legal counsel, Jason Risch, who will be helping us out today. He's just going to give us a quick deep dive into the 2026 upcoming form changes, I think, and just kind of a few other things going on with the forms. So without further ado, Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Nick. And as Nick said, we're recording this for IR. This is, and actually, I already see somebody has enabled an AI transcriber. We're going to see if we can kick that right now. But the point of that is this video is for Realtor members only. It's only for the use of the Realtor members right here live as we speak. There is no recording this or republishing this or commenting on this is for your own court outside of this particular live viewing is not authorized. Hopefully, Nick, I don't know if that worked or if you can even see what I was trying to do with that FF Firefly thing that was going on. But anyway, so the point of it is so we can have some frank discussions here and talk about the forms that are going to be released here shortly. We'll start by saying that these forms are still technically a work in progress. They will be published in 2026 but they are 99% of the way there. So if you see something that's happening, when we pull up some forms, maybe some typos or punctuation, trust me, that's all reviewed with a fine-tooth comb by IR before it goes out and will probably be addressed. But having said that, this is kind of something new. So providing a live update or a sneak peek as to what's coming is new to IR, and hopefully you all enjoy what we're going to cover here today. We'll go through the forms, basically talking about rep agreements and purchase sale agreements mostly. As time allows, we can address some other things. But before that, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about how this all comes about and give our propers to the forms committee, the IR forms committee, that does a tremendous amount of work as part of your forms. And that, as you all know, forms is a member value that you get by being a member of the Idaho Association of Realtors. Your dues money goes to work on these forms, to review these forms, to publish them and provide them to you. So the way that works is IR appoints a committee. The committee is appointed, like all IR committees, through the pleasure of the president. And the president staffs the committee with a various group of individuals, and it's a robust group. It's a large group. There's a lot of people. The representation tries to include practitioners from North Idaho, from East Idaho, Magic Valley, Treasure Valley. The practices, whether it's there's some folks that have very large brokerages that are involved. There's the small brokers. There's commercial, farm and ranch, residential. And so it's really a diverse group of folks that sit on that committee. And the way that this works is that committee gets together, and what they do is IR collects the forms and all the suggestions related to the forms throughout the year, and they compile all those. They assign them to forms committee members. And committee members will reach out to folks that have an idea or a comment, suggestion, a change, and talk with them and try to understand what the desire is to change there, bring it to the committee. And the committee then, as they like to say, cusses and discusses over 2-day meeting in person in Boise and goes through literally every suggestion that is provided. Part of what I do as well is we watch out there in the world as you guys are using these forms. Sometimes there's disagreements. We hear about those. We log those. I get them on the hotline from time to time. We learn about them. And just ways to make the forms a little bit better, a little smoother, or something that makes it more clear to understand. Or occasionally our forms can end up being litigated in court. There'll be a buyer and a seller who didn't agree and they're fighting over the contract. And of course the contract is the form. We watch those. We'd like to know about them. If you're involved in one, or you unfortunately have a client that's involved in one, call the hotline, let us know about it. because not that there's always something wrong with the form, but if there's something we can do to improve it to maybe help avoid that litigation, obviously that's best interest for everybody. So all those comments come together. The committee then discusses everything. They vote on every motion and they decide when a change is needed or when it's not needed, and then it comes out of committee and gets to be what you see here today. So we have to give credit to all those hardworking volunteer members of the forms committee that make this possible. So that's kind of the gist of it, and that's how that works. Nick, why don't we dive right into it? Let's pull up our first form that we want to talk about today. And as I said, these are work in progress, so things can change. But let's look at the first form there, Nick, that's on our list. I think we're going to dive into the reps, so it's probably the buyer's rep agreement. Okay, Nick's sharing a screen there, and
You see that okay?
yeah, I can. Let me see here if I can. I just want to adjust my view so I've got as large as possible on screen. Can you zoom in here so it fills the screen? Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Okay, now, so here's what we're looking at. This is our RE14. And what you're going to see in these videos is there's some select highlighted language. This language does not cover every single typographical, punctuation that was added, things like that. Those are not featured in this video. You're going to see just some highlighted text that is kind of the bigger points that the committee wanted to address in this webinar. So with that, let's start with RA14, our buyer's representation agreement. Obviously, as you all know, this is the form we use to work with buyers. And there's been a lot of comments about these buyer's reps over the years. We've always had them, and we've always used them here in Idaho. It's highly recommended you use one, especially in a post-settlement world. There's lots of things in here that are important, and these are great forms to have with your buyers. So make sure you get these if you're working with a buyer. Nick, if you'll scroll down, we'll get to our first highlighted text, which is here on this page. And actually, let's scroll up a little bit so they can see which section we're talking about, Nick, dealing with the compensation. So if you recognize what Nick's about to bring up on the previous page this is the compensation agreement. All right, this is what broker is going to be compensated for as a result of providing these services to the buyer. And there's various different ways to do that. Percentage of sales price being the most common out there in practice, I would say. But lots of folks do it different ways. Lease property, you can have flat fees. You can just have a dollar amount. Retainer fees and hourly rates. So this is the section that we're dealing with when it comes to what we're going to look at. So let's pop on the next page, Nick. And this deals with the cancellation of these terms. Obviously, we hope these transactions go along well and everybody gets to closing and you are entitled to your compensation because your buyer wants to pay you for a job well done. But in the event that doesn't happen, we short up some language here. We actually pulled this from the seller's rep agreement, so might be familiar to some of you. But this language that was placed in here really deals with the situation where a broker or a buyer might terminate this agreement before getting there. And so, okay, well, you've worked with a buyer for 6 months, you're showing them 4,000 houses, and eventually they try to maybe buy one that they've seen that sort of circumventing your agreement. That's where this paragraph comes in. It's a cancellation fee paragraph is what it's referred to a lot of times. So you can see there that we have some language talks about, number one, this contract is for a term. We want courts to understand, look, and of course our buyers and clients, we're going to advise them of all this when we enter into the agreement, but that this is for a specific amount of time. And it states, in the event the buyer breaches this representation agreement by terminating it prior to its expiration, said termination shall be deemed to be wrongful interference. These are some buzzwords that are used by our courts when they're interpreting service contracts. And so we pulled those. I actually got that from a Supreme Court case several years back. We put the language in here that the courts themselves used when doing some analysis. And so what we said here is, okay, look, if buyer breaches this, then buyer shall be liable to broker for a cancellation fee equal to blank percent of the selling price of the property acquired or a dollar sign. And now, a little practice point here. There's a lot of folks who just absolutely hate these clauses. Brokers, agents out there just say, we don't use them. If somebody doesn't want to work with us, so be it. We all live and let live, and we go on down the road. Nothing wrong with that. That's a practice point that you want to do. Other brokers will say, well, you know what? We keep these in here because there are circumstances where we have been working with buyer for a long, long time. We've spent a bunch of effort in showing them a lot of homes, and so we're going to have a cancellation fee in here that if the buyer breaches it, terminates it, that it's going to be a stated dollar amount to make up for the time we spent, or you can certainly use the percentage in there. Although the percentage in there would be based upon any property acquired. And so if the buyer just decides not to acquire property, you could have an issue there. But anyway, so not to say these are, this isn't mandatory like everything in our forms. These are recommendations, and you can use these as you see fit in your practice. While I'm here, I'll say something I see a lot. We get calls on the hotline, and we see, cancellation fee equal to, and maybe somebody doesn't want to use one of these, or they just aren't paying a lot of attention to it, and they'll put 0 in these blanks, equal to 0% or $0. That's essentially saying that any buyer can terminate this at any point in time without paying you anything. And so, again, maybe you want to do that. Maybe that's intentional, but if it's if you're putting a dollar amount in there, just know that's a dollar amount. And so, for example, it was a $1. Buyer can say, okay, I'm canceling this agreement. I'm paying you your dollar. Goodbye. And that's pretty much the end of that. So just want to be real thoughtful when you're doing that. NA is fine to put in that blank if you want to make it that's not applicable, or if you're just not going to use this clause, you can put that in the other terms and conditions and just say there is no cancellation fee, or this is can't be canceled. That type of language. The last sentence here that you'll see on the screen: this fee shall be the minimum amount owed to broker, as buyer may be liable for further payment. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Nick. And what this means is, look, okay, you may maybe you put something in there, $100 to cancel it, or what have you. And but then it turns out, wow, we really got down the road here. We've got a lot of out-of-pocket expenses for the broker that the buyer said, well, go incur those expenses, I'll pay you back, things of that nature. So it's just a minimum amount. You can certainly add on a case-by-case basis additional damages that you may see. For we actually call one of them out here in circumstance where it could be probably kind of rare, but it could be a situation to where a commission is owed to a seller's agent. If you're under contract, there's some things happening there. So we want to make sure that that's available. So this is basically a minimum. If you want to go above and beyond that, you can add other specific elements, specific damages in a cancellation situation. Okay, so that's cancellation situation on the buyer's rep. So let's, and again, this is identical in the seller's rep. If you're familiar with that, you've seen this before. Nick, let's go down and see if we had other changes to the document. I'm not sure if it had any.
Are we allowed to ask questions or save them?
Let's save them. Why don't we do this? Well, let me get through the buyer. Let me get through the rep agreements. We'll see where we are on time. I'll pause before I go into the PSAs and maybe catch some questions there. Okay. Nick, look. Oh, great. Okay. Audio, video surveillance. This used to live in the blue brochure. This was a disclosure that it's very important, and anybody who's practicing out there in this day and age knows that this happens. It happens a lot, whether intentionally or unintentionally. When people have security cameras. It starts with the doorbell camera, but it could transpire all throughout the house, anywhere on the property, watching the street. As lawyers, we have comments where we say, look, from the minute you get out of bed in the morning to the minute you go to bed, you're on a video getting recorded somewhere. Behave accordingly, because somebody's going to be able to say what's going on there. When you walk into a home and you're a buyer and you're wandering around the home and you're talking about it, oh my gosh, this is the greatest house ever, and I can't believe they listed it for this cheap amount. Those are not conversations you want a seller to hear when you're going to start negotiating on a price. And so a lot of folks have conversations with their buyers before going into a home and let them know this is happening. I would highly recommend you do that if that's not part of your standard practice with your buyer. You start it and let them know what's happening. This is something that's important in this day and age that buyers are aware of, and they may not think about it. And some agents don't think about it. They may pull the buyer aside into a bedroom and say, hey, let's talk about something out back here. You don't know what's being recorded in that room, or these cameras can be hidden in any place. and very, very small places, and the places you can't even think of. They can put a camera, they can do it. Trust me. And then you were talking to your clients about what they're willing to pay for a home, or features of the home that they like. That can be used against them. So I'm not going to get into whether that's appropriate or whether sellers should be doing that, shouldn't be doing that. What I'm going to say is, if you don't think you're being recorded in this day and age, that's your fault. But you just watch out for it. So the fact that that happens out there, we know about it. You guys use it in your practice to to warn your clients about it. Um, we worked with IREC several years ago to actually include that in there. We were talking about including it in forms. IREC said, yeah, that's something that we think is consumer based, so let's go ahead and put it in the blue brochure. So they actually had that line in the blue brochure. But as you know, the blue brochure has been revised and been changed. It's not even blue anymore. But this came out of the blue brochure. It's in sort of the secondary. There's a Scantron, I think, on the brochure now, and you can kind of see it if you go and click somewhere. But the committee felt like it was important that this is communicated to somebody without them having to go look for it somewhere. We're going to put it right in front of them to make sure that they are aware of it. And of course, as we know, everybody reads through every line of our contracts. That's what the law says anyway, once you sign it. But we want to make sure that folks are aware of it. So we put it in here, and it's going to live right there in section number 11 in the buyer's rep agreement. Let's go ahead and scroll down, Nick, and see if there's any other changes on buyer's rep. Nope, doesn't look like it. All right, let's move on to the next form, which is probably going to be compensation with buyer. That's my guess. Yep, okay. This one, you'll see at the top, they added, or actually, some of these are just moving. They didn't necessarily add or move. You'll see move when we get to like responsible broker. Just some lines that were placed at the top of the forms to make it easier for you guys to kind of do some of the administrative work, but also just to make it clear as to exactly what's going on. So that's what you're seeing there at the top of that page. Scroll down, Nick. Do we have anything else to talk about on this one? No. All right, that moves us on to the next one. RE16 seller's rep, and I think it's just going to be the audio video again. Oh no, wait, stop right there. Okay, so what we have here is talking about the brokerage fee, and this form was changed last year before, I think, where we started having conversations and we inserted this text about what this starts to look like when a seller starts talking about providing cooperation to a buyer's representative. And so this paragraph got put in there, and basically what this paragraph says is that, yeah, we put these percentages in here, and this is what I want you to offer in cooperation, from the seller if they want to. They don't have to, but if they do, and then later on you enter into a purchase sale agreement with a purchaser, then that's obviously going to change what you've said here. So perhaps you've said, well, we're going to offer a percentage, and we're not going to talk about numbers because we don't do that when we all get together at a group. But or let's just say, for example, maybe a seller says, no, I'm not going to put down how much I'm going to pay a buyer's agent. Let's see what kind of work that buyer's agent's going to do before I agree to pay him. It's fine there. You can do it that way. But then at some point in time, you're going to change that. And so you can put it into a purchase sale agreement. We know the RE21 has language now that talks about compensating or cooperating with buyers to help buyers pay their agents. And they vary sometimes, depending on the offer, depending on the services provided. A seller may or may want to pay more or less for a particular buyer, and they will negotiate that, as we all know. Those are always negotiable, and sometimes it's increased or decreased based upon that offer. What we wanted to do is just make it clear it's for that transaction only. So for example, you go out and maybe somebody's lowballing a seller, and they say, okay, well, if that's the case, then I'm only going to offer a very minimal amount to the buyer's broker, or buyer's broker, buyer's agent. But then that transaction falls apart, and then they get a full price offer. And they say, okay, great. I've got some more room to work here. I want to provide that person more, or maybe it's flipped. It's more or less whatever happens. We just want to make sure that it's specific to those transactions. So in other words, once the seller decides to compensate a particular buyer's agent for a certain amount of money, dropping that amount or something to match up with an offer, it doesn't mean it's for every single transaction. And you're going to see this in the RE16A in a second. We added some language to that effect as well. So Nick, I think that explains that section. Anything else in the 16? Okay, we got some highlighted language here. This is okay. So this paragraph again, just some clarification here. What we wanted to do is that um, what we are talking about here is that this is probably known to everybody in the world, but we want to make sure that it is, and contractually to protect you guys as brokerage, you want to make sure we're making these disclosures where they understand that if you're a broker, and particularly if you're a large broker, and you're listing a property for a seller, your brokerage may be representing buyers as well, and those buyers may be looking at that home for the seller, and so you want to obviously disclose that. We do that with the dual agency thing, but think about it like this: if a seller says, "Well, I'm listing property with you, and I want you to sell my property for $1 million," okay, well, now they also find out that, oh, you're representing a buyer and you didn't show buyer my house. Why didn't you sell the buyer on my house? You're working for me. You should have been out there and forcing your buyer to buy my home or something like that. Well, we all know buyers, are going to choose their own property. And so the point is we're just disclosing that. And also, by the way, we're going to take other listings. So, somebody says, I want you to sell my property for $1 million. Great. Well, the guy across the street, maybe you take a listing for that home too, and that's $1 million home, and you're going to have buyers competing. And so it just kind of shows not what I wouldn't say it's a conflict of interest. It's just disclosing that there is this type of activity going on. That brokerages represent buyers and sellers on both sides of the transactions, on different sides of the transactions. In this particular circumstance, it just talks about how a buyer may be looking at other properties as well, and that the seller understands all that. So that was just kind of beefing up that disclosure that was already there. We just wanted to clarify it because it wasn't worded the best. The committee felt like there was some clarification that could be needed. Okay, so that's 22 or section 22. Anything else in the RE16? I don't think so. Let's move on to the next doc. Okay, the 16A, and this is the change what I was talking about before. You can see it. Sometimes the total brokerage fees are changed, and so we have used the RE16A for that. We had tick boxes. The RE16 is for changing any representation agreements, buyers or sellers, or comp agreements. And so there are some tick boxes there for some of the more common changes. But of course, down there in line 38, there's the other. It can be used to change any part of those contracts. But under the total brokerage fee, changing the percentages, sometimes, as I said, the committee heard that there is practices out there where a particular transaction may involve an increased or a decreased amount. And so we just wanted to say, okay, if we're changing the total brokerage fee, the current form just says it's changed. Well, maybe it's just changed for only a specific transaction, whether it be a specific buyer, specific seller. So that's what was added to the RE16A to allow that just to be neck down and say, well, all right, okay, I'm a seller. I was going to offer X amount, but now I got this lowball buyer coming in. I don't have a lot of the good offers. I'm not going to pay very much to that guy's, agent. That was part of the co-op. Part of the negotiation was, well, they're working for less than whatever, and I know what they're getting, and you have those conversations. So for this transaction only, I'm going to agree to this, or vice versa. You got an agent that says, "Hey, this is what I work for, and this is what my client needs from you," and you say, "Okay, fine, I'll pay a little bit more, and I'll do it, but only for that transaction." Right? So, it just allows you to provide more options and to tailor these to whatever particular need may come up. I think that's all in the 16A, and it's probably all on the rep agreement. So it might be time to pause. What's next, Nick? Let's just make sure we're done with those. Yep, we're into purchase sales. So let's pause here, and let's go maybe back to full screen if people want to ask a question. We can't dive into these forever, Nick. And I don't know how you're going to wrangle the cat so that not everybody's talking at once. But I did hear that there was at least one question relating to those changes.
Yeah, so if you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat. We have two in there already, so Jason, I'll just relay those to you, and if we can answer them, we will. So our first question is from Jonathan McLaren. So if it is defined in the representation agreement of cooperating commission, how does client get to choose a different amount based on the specifics of the PSA?
If it's designated in a representation agreement, your client, your seller, client, I don't know if it's talking about clients, buyers, regardless, it's always fully negotiable, and those can always change. And so, throughout a situation, well, we know that the RE21 has the compensation part in there, and so sometimes a buyer or seller will say, "Yeah, I'll take care of buyer. I know buyer's got to pay their agent X percent." And buyer puts that in there and says, I need you to pay that if I'm going to make this offer. And if you don't, I'm not going to be able to make this offer because I got to pay that agent out of my own pocket. I have a contract with them. And so that's why that's there. It's of course it's negotiable. And anytime you enter into a representation agreement, just like a purchase sale agreement, contracts can be amended and can be amended as it goes down the road. So I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but if we do have language in there that if an RE21 states a compensation agreement or a compensation amount in it from the seller saying I will pay Y in commission, that the language in our purchase sale agreements automatically changes the RE16. There's some language in there that does that. So maybe that answers the question.
Jason, just to add some color here, Jonathan McLaren. I was just looking at it from the seller's rep document where it indicates of that brokerage fee charged, which is negotiable, X amount will be cooperating. That was where my question was stemming from. I know it's in the RE21, but if somebody were to call me and say, hey, are you offering a cooperating commission? I have it defined in my seller's rep.
Right.
It sounded like what I heard from you, based on the structure of the offer, you could negotiate that besides what's written in the seller's representation agreement.
Well, no,
with an amendment.
Yes. The answer is yes, you could. It probably doesn't happen very often, but it could come up in a circumstance. Let's just use an example. A seller has what they have their dream full price offer, and they say, oh, that's great. Somebody walks in the door. Here's what I'm putting in my pocket. I got to pay off my mortgage, and then I'm profiting this, or I got to go buy another home or what have you. They know what they need. And so that's all baked into what they're paying you, what they're going to pay the buyer's agent, what they're going to take. And so in a dream circumstance, you can say, yeah, this is what I'm doing. And here's what I'm paying you, list agent. And I want you to share this much of it with somebody else. Right, that's based upon those terms of that RE16, which has a purchase price in it. Now, if that purchase price changes and comes down, and seller finds out, wow, this house is really not marketable, it's not desirable for whatever reason, and they can't get what they want out of it, that changes their entire circumstance. And so, yeah, it can change. Doesn't happen very often, but yeah, it could change.
So in reference to that, if somebody were to call and ask, hey, are you offering cooperating commission? You could say, well, we are, but it's going to be based on the structure of the offer.
You can say that. You can say, hey, you see my list price. This is what we're offering for list price. Come in below that, and I guess we'll have to talk about it. But at the end of the day, a buyer typically has their agreement with, the buyer has their agreement with their buyer's agent, and it is what it is. It's not, I hesitate to say, well, you want to change this for everybody who comes along, because the reality is the buyers are making contracts with buyer's agents, and so. That doesn't always change as fluid. So, but the answer to your question would be, yeah, it can happen.
Thank you.
We had a couple of questions about the other terms section in the RA14. So one was curious if the phrase cannot be canceled is a viable option to write in for a broker or brokerage to write in. And the other question, was, could a buyer be responsible for other damages commissions should that be written in on the other terms and conditions?
That's already in there a little bit based upon the boilerplate language. But if you anticipate or you have situations and you want to make that crystal clear, that's exactly what other terms and conditions are for. There's a lot of brokerages who say, hey, look, I got burned in this transaction, and so I always drop this line into every one of my contracts now, something like that. So good question. Okay, if that's it, then we'll spend the next bit on purchase sales.
We have a couple more, but I think we should move on. If we have time at the end, we can circle back to the rest of these, Jason. So okay. We'll jump in on the next forum for you.
Good idea. All right, we're going to jump into the purchase sales here, and you'll see a lot of the language is going to be the same, on all of our purchase sale agreements. But not all of them, but some of them. Okay, right off the bat, you're going to see responsible broker shall be. This is highlighted because it was moved. This is not new language, as you all know. It was at a different place. The committee spent some time talking about it and just felt like it is a very important part of this contract. It's important for you guys practicing out there because responsible broker has statutory obligations beyond just holding the money. A lot of people just think, well, the responsible broker is the person that's holding the earnest money. That is not the only job a responsible responsible broker has, and I'm not going to spoon feed it to you on purpose. I'm going to make you go look it up because you need to educate yourself on what those are. But it's important that that be stated there at the top, and they just felt like it was great to put right after identifying both the brokerages, then talking about which one the responsible broker shall be. So that was just a move, relocation, not a change. Okay, this next one here, okay, also a relocation and a clarification. Hopefully, there used to be a tick box that was up above this. We're in the finance contingency section, and this deals with buyers getting financing and getting a loan or actually additional financial terms. Could be cash offer. Actually, any of this. Talking about approximate funds due from buyers at closing. There used to be a tick box up above this that had a buyer was obtaining proceeds. And I can't remember exactly how it was written, but it was sort of orphaned out there because it had been changed over time. Believe it started with buyer was getting money from the sale of another home. And then they kind of changed that. That changed over the years. It led to a little bit of confusion. So then there was some clarification. And it's just, like I said, the committee felt like it was sort of orphaned, standing out in the middle of an odd spot on the contract. So they spent some time going over it. And they moved it down here and clarified that is buyer obtaining proceeds from a third-party non-lender source, yes or no? And that was something that the committee felt like that's important for the buyer to disclose, or sort of for at least people to talk about. If you're getting financing, that's great. I'm financing 80% of the transaction. I'm going to show up with 20% at closing. But I'm getting the 20% from my, great Aunt Martha, who's decided that she wants to, help me out. I would tick this box and say, yes, that's where they're coming from. Seller is entitled to know that, because if something happens to great Aunt Martha, then obviously your offer is not as favorable as somebody who just says, yeah, I've got 20% sitting in the bank. So that's why that was there. And sometimes, and it's meant to, a lot of these things are meant to encourage conversation between agents. When you see that as a seller's agent, you see, okay, that's checked. Call the buyer's agent. What are we talking about here? Where are these proceeds coming from? Are they buying a lottery ticket and, just hoping that they're going to come up with 20%? You're going to want to let your seller know that. So anyway, that's where that was located. Keep in mind, Nick, let's scroll up one page to page 1. The tick box is still there about it being contingent on the sale of another home. That is that still lives in here, and that's always something that you want to make sure that you disclose if that's what's going on. So a little bit different. Okay, Nick, let's go on the next highlight. Okay, all right, title insurance. This one, a lot of red, a lot of yellow here, but it's really it's a very complex solution to a simple problem, and we spent a lot of time trying to come up with this language and kind of making sure we understand the way this works. And it was to address something that was not addressed previously in the contracts in an excellent way. And so, as always, the committee wants to make these better and more clear. What this deals with is, if you have a preliminary title commitment and it comes out, we all know the buyer gets a chance to review that commitment and say, wait a minute, I don't like this, the title, or you've got this lien here, or you've got this encumbrance cloud upon the title, go get that fixed, or what have you, or terminate at that point if they want to. They can say, whoa, I'm not buying this property. But as we know, in practice, a lot of times the title commitments get updated. Title companies do further research. Further information comes up. The title, the seller's title, the condition of seller's title gets more known as you move through the transaction, for lack of a better term. So we want to talk about this in a way that allows a buyer, if a title company comes along and says, oh, by the way, we're revising our disclosures. We forgot to disclose that we found this document that was recorded out there, and there's a giant easement running right through the middle of the property. Obviously, that's something the buyer is going to concern themselves with and say, whoa, I need time to look at that. What does that mean to me? And so basically, what this language that was added says is that we are now going to allow buyer additional time. Anytime that there is something that changes with title, they get the additional 2 business days to take a look at something and object to it. And then if they do object to it, it talks about how that's handled. So that's the simple fix. There was also, as we started going down that rabbit hole, there was some other circumstance that came up in that a lot of times there was conversation at committee where they talked about examples where a seller might not know about the condition of title. and something comes up on a title report that the seller did not know about, that did not know was there. And it may not be something the buyer cares about, but for an example that I can probably bring it home with is, let's say there's a lien recorded against the property, the real property. The seller didn't know that lien was there. The seller maybe disagrees with that lien, or it's not him, or what have you, or just didn't know, or was kind of hoping that it wasn't recorded. Something along those lines, something that the seller in good faith did not know about. The seller should not be forced to go through the transaction. So, for example, seller says, "I want to sell my home, $500,000 home. I got a mortgage, but here's what I need to net." Well, it turns out the lien is going to come into what they net. They're still not to pay off the mortgage, but and I'm sorry, I probably when I say net and gross, maybe I shouldn't do that. But what the seller's putting in their pocket is important to seller. That's what they're selling their home for, and they can only do it for a certain amount, especially if they're going to buy another home somewhere else. So, so that's important to seller. So if the title comes out and it shows this lien on there, and it essentially takes too much out of that part of the profit that the seller is going to make from the home, the seller needs to be able to get out of that transaction. Shouldn't be forced to go through with it necessarily. And so that's where this last paragraph, the one right above the B, right above title company, begins with, if seller was unaware that a circumstance. That's what that paragraph is all about. And it's, again, to help sellers that find themselves in a circumstance where they shouldn't be forced to have a gun to their head to sell a property that's got an unknown condition on it that they weren't. That, again, a big important part there was, if seller was unaware that a circumstance, right, that's the seller had to be unaware of it going in. So that's what all that revision was about, and just making this easier. It was complicated because we've now wrapped these CC&Rs into this title thing, and as a lawyer, I can tell you drafting this language was actually challenging, but it took a long time. But we feel like we got it appropriate so that it's going to work well for both your buyers and your sellers. Okay, let's move on, Nick. And by the way, you're going to see that change in all the PSAs. Just added some language. We get these every year. Get a lot of them on the hotline. Actually, no, wait, I'm sorry. This is a different one. This is just clarifying that a lot of times when buyers would come up to inspect a property, we know what the seller has to do. They have to make the property available for inspection. Clarifying so that, look, seller, when we're going to inspect your house, that means we need to look at the control panel, the electrical control panel. A lot of times it's in the garage, it's stacked behind all the boxes the seller has boxed. They're ready to move out. You can't get to that electrical panel. An inspector is absolutely going to want to look at that. A buyer is absolutely going to want to look at that. You got to make it available to be inspected. Same thing with the attic, HVAC, and crawl space. The committee wanted to include those languages just to make sure that allowed access to those things, and didn't have the crawl space nailed shut or something like that. I have no idea. Yes, it's going to put a little more on the seller, but if they're selling their house and they're opening it to inspection, they should allow it inspection to all parts of it. So the committee wanted to make sure that language was in there to help inspire sellers to make those parts of the home available. All right, Nick, let's move on. All right, let's stop there. Okay, a little changes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. These are pretty obvious. We just did some changes in the grid. This one highlighted there. We're talking about the lender tax service fee. Just that's for clarification. Nick, scroll down a little bit. Here again. Oh, we just the one thing that was eliminated here. This is the selling brokerages compensation section that was added. You should all be intimately familiar with this section. If you're not, go back and read it 10 times because it's important. There used to be a tick box in here where you were making a decision and just ticking a box, and it just didn't work in practice. It was kind of confusing or providing some trip up, and so it was just to clarify the tick boxes were removed, so you can just add in either one of those blanks there. You don't necessarily have to tick the box. So that was just a practice point that was changed. Nothing substantive there. All right. Again, this is just to kind of clarify some things. Assignment. We all know the tick box says this currently says it may or may not be sold, transferred, assigned, essentially, and the clients should be making that decision and deciding whether or not they want to do that. If they don't, then this language has been added. So if you miss this tick box, and you should never miss tick boxes, you should address each one of them with your clients. Make sure that the appropriate one is identified. But if you do miss it, there's a catch here, kind of a backup help you. And that is, it essentially does a default of may if left blank. So if you fail to check a box, this is going to be an assignable contract, which, by the way, is the default in Idaho. All contracts are assignable unless they're stated that they are not. And I think that's it on the RE21. Okay, we got about 20 minutes left. Let's buzz through the other purchase sales real quick. I think everything's going to be repetitive, but I know there's one that isn't. So again, here we are, RE22, pre-sold new construction. We already talked about responsible broker. That got moved to the top. Okay, third-party lender source, yes, no, we talked about that. Let's keep going. This was just clarifying long-term financing when we were talking about some construction compliance and talking about whether a buyer has an FHA or VA loan. I mean, that's pretty obvious as to what it was doing, just clarifying it's long-term financing. Okay, that's that title insurance. We talked about that. That's the same. Okay, that's going to take us on the assignment exactly the same. All right, so that's the end of the 22. Let's go to the 23. I know there's something in here that changed that's different. That one's not. Responsible broker. And then we'll get to, yeah, that's the same. The assignment language just lives in a different place. Okay, this is what changed. So if you go to and you look at this, there used to be that whole preliminary title commitment language that was in a residential purchase sale agreement. It's very important. You know, you go through and everybody's got their time frames and everything like that. The this particular purchase and sale agreement, for those who do commercial transactions are a different beast, and they have just different sort of industry standards. It's not that that's legally different necessarily. It's just the way that business is done on a commercial basis. And I can just summarize it generally as, a buyer makes an offer, then a buyer's got a certain amount of time to do their due diligence. And during that period, they do everything. They look at title, they'll inspect the property, they'll do, perk tests, they'll do environmental tests, they do everything within that due diligence. And then they get to that deadline and they say, yes, I'm going to go forward, or no, I'm not. So that's the biggest difference, I would say. So that all that language about preliminary title commitment and CC&Rs not as common in commercial buildings, can be, but they're not always. So the committee revised this to just make it more in tune with what commercial clients are used to seeing. And so we just threw the preliminary title commitments in this situation, talking about what the seller has to disclose and deliver to the buyer. And so there's this tick list, and now that lives in there just to kind of bring it all into one place and make it easier. Okay, Nick, let's move on. Okay, I think that's it. So that, I think, is going to get us to the end of our actually, you know what, Nick, pull up the RE21 again. I think there was one thing I missed. Go to the grid on the RE21. And I don't think it was highlighted because it wasn't a substantive change, but it was something that that actually there was a lot of time and discussion on. So I want to point it out because you all might appreciate it. Whoa. Nope. I'm sorry. It was the one where there was some formatting done on this where we put a header in there about talking about contingencies and things. And you'll see it when we get to the final publication and do the final video on it. But there was some formatting here to, I think, kind of change. But with that, I'll stop. We got about 15 minutes left. So we can start answering some questions about PSA. I'm sure we could do that all day, but we can't do that. Obviously, we've only got about 15 minutes. And there is one thing I want to address. There's a new tool being released by IR that I think a lot of people are going to like. So Nick, grab a couple questions and let's talk about those.
So we got one from Alana Burns. If the seller terminates based on discovery of an issue on title, they still have to reimburse the buyers for the expenses they incurred on inspections, et cetera. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, and I think that language is in there. I think it talks about that. Then, but yeah, that part of it shouldn't have changed.
For the RE21 title insurance, why wouldn't the seller have to return non-refundable EM if they chose to terminate?
Well, that's when you say non-refundable, non-refundable means non-refundable. It needs to mean that. So be very, very careful whenever you're doing that. Now, if it was a bad faith circumstance, like I probably shouldn't have brought it up in my example of, the sellers trying to get away without a lien being recorded against their property. As a lawyer, I always just struggle, like, how can an owner of a property not know what's affecting their title? But the committee said, look, this comes up and it's a real thing. Obviously, if in every contract there is built in Idaho the standard of good faith and fair dealing. If somebody is trying to lie, cheat, and steal or fool the person they're contracting with, that's bad faith, and that would be a problem. And so, in that type of a circumstance, if you say, "Wait a minute, seller, you knew this was going on. You were just trying to pull a fast one and hope it didn't show up on title. And by the way, I spent something out of my pocket," a buyer could go back after a seller for that under that bad faith concept of in the contract. But by the way, they had to make a choice. We actually had that conversation, to say, well, unless it's non-refundable. Well, wait a minute, why did it go non-refundable? Maybe it went non-refundable because it was held, for another reason that really was the buyer who was causing the problem, and there was a good reason it went non-refundable. Sellers shouldn't be penalized for that. So they had to pick away one way or the other. Non-refundable comes back or it doesn't. They decided on doesn't just because of non-refundable needs to mean non-refundable. Anyway, I want to spend some time on that, but maybe more of those.
Does the language in RE21 and RE22 regarding the buyer's broker's compensation conflict with the listing agreement, given that the listing agreement specifies cooperating broker compensation while the purchase agreement states that the seller will pay the buyer's broker?
So I don't think they mean listing agreement. I think they're talking about a listing contract. Well, obviously on the MLS we don't talk about compensation anymore. So no, the RE16 and the RE21, we spent some time reading those together, and hopefully they play nice together and there's not a conflict. We know that the representation agreement, the RE16, is drafted at the outset of the conversation. Then you post it on the MLS, and then you see what happens with the offers that come in. And so that changes, and especially now with compensation or cooperation, we know the RE21 can change what's stated in the RE16. If you feel like there is a conflict, always go back and amend that RE16 so that it's crystal clear that the buyer or the seller authorized you as the list agent to pay what you're paying. If you don't feel like it's clear, do an addendum. You always want to make that clear. You don't want it to come back to bite you. But there is language in the RE21 that will, I don't want to use the term automatically change the RE16, but that's essentially what it does. And you really have to spend some time with those to understand them. And I recommend everybody does that because it's important in this day and age.
So, Jason, Jonathan McLaren, in that comment you just made, does the RE21 supersede the RE16?
The way it's written now, yes, because it was executed after the fact, and it says right in the 16, if I execute an RE21 later on and change this number, that number controls. That's right in the 16. In fact, it's a good point. Why don't we, Nick, pull up the 16 and take me down to that compensation section. Let's highlight it for everybody because this is important. It is a good question. I think you're too far down. It's up toward the top. I think it's at the bottom of page 1 and it straddles to page 2. Go. You're in a buyer's rep. That's why it's not there. Go to you want the seller's rep RE16. Oh no, you're in. Hold on. Wait a minute. Why does it say? Sorry, I'm trying to read the tiny print. Yes. Okay. RE16. We're good. Start scrolling. I'll tell you when to stop.
Line 57.
Thank you. Okay, so here we go. So this is section 1 right there. Stop. Okay, brokerage fee. This is where we talk about all that. And this paragraph states, in the event seller, subsequent to signing this agreement, executes a purchase sale agreement with a purchaser or any other agreement consenting to pay a cooperating brokerage, and we try to educate our consumers that cooperating brokerage is going to be a selling brokerage, and has an amount different than the amount stated in this agreement, the subsequent agreement shall control, and the total brokerage fee to seller's brokers shall be increased or decreased accordingly. And then again, we added language for that transaction only. Then there's a sentence that says, okay, well, we increased it, we decreased it, like how's this going to work? But just focus on that for a second. So that's exactly the question that you asked. Very important to know that. And the reason that was added was because we knew that commissions are always negotiable, and that things are changing on the RE21. This makes it crystal clear that the seller was already contemplating a subsequent document. In the law, that's how we're going to refer to it, as there was contemplation of a subsequent agreement that may affect this one, and so we called it out right there.
So that supports all commissions are negotiable. And so prior to this line being in here, if it was different in the RE21, you would have to go back and do an addendum to the listing agreement to be in accordance.
To have every I dotted and T crossed, absolutely correct. But as a lawyer, I'm going to say, well, look, everybody knew what they were doing. Here you have a seller making a statement in July, and then they sold the property in August, and they made a statement later in August. That's the statement that controls, but you don't want to get lawyers involved with things unless absolutely necessary. So yeah, that's why we put that in there. Good comment.
Thank you. I don't mean to beat this to death, but the most common topic over the last year since the settlement continues to be compensation process amongst office staff meetings.
Okay, good to know. Well, we'll continue to try to educate it. All right, let's move on, Nick, to that infographic. This was a tool that was invented, and there should be some credit given to somebody out there for this, or maybe not. Maybe you're going to hate it, and maybe that's why they're anonymous. But somebody came up with this and was using it in their practice. They submitted it to IR for consideration. It went to the full forms committee. Nick, let's make that full screen if we can. And well, actually, no, you can't, because you'll miss the bottom. Yeah, that's a bad idea. Go back. Okay. So what this is trying to do is help with what I guess used to be the most common conversation amongst office meetings, was how does that inspection timeline work when the seller has, or when the seller and buyer enter into a contract and the buyer goes and inspects the property. We know that in that inspection time frame, there's back and forth. I'll just call it that. And this is helping clarify that. And so somebody made this flow chart. Actually, it's pretty good as far as helping those who are more visual based. We all know people learn differently. You can read a contract 10 times, you don't understand it until you actually map it out. That's exactly what they did. And so the idea is this flow chart that's first line there talks about buyer's inspection. They're doing their due diligence. Three things can come out of that. The buyer accepts buyer accepts. Actually, there's a situation where buyer doesn't even request repairs and by the way, that's what's hard about this. You cannot possibly put every possible circumstance on one of these things and not have it be huge and tiny print. So use this for what it's worth. You can adjust it if you want to, but anyway, so buyer accepts and then buyer terminates, right? We have those two different things going on. Or in the middle, the RE10 comes along, buyer requests repairs. Three things come out of the RE10. And that's the seller accepts it, and you can say, okay, seller accepts it. Now what? We follow the arrow down, boom, proceed to closing. Nick, scroll up just a little bit for me so I can still see. So RE10 comes out again. We're going to follow that center arrow, but now we go straight down. Seller has rejected it. Now what do? Well, we follow the arrow down to this one. Buyer's got their three option. They can just say, okay, well, seller didn't want to make those changes. Fine, I'm going ahead with the property anyway. They can continue to negotiate and say, come on, seller, this thing needs a new roof, and you really need to pay for that. And they can do that negotiation. Critical to watch timeframes if you're going to do that, because the time frame will run out and buyer will have defaulted back to option number one. But then there's a third option. Buyer can always just terminate at that point and say, okay, seller, you didn't agree to put this out there. I absolutely need that new roof. I'm not buying your property without it, so I'm out of here. So they do that way. Going back up to this other seller counters on the RE10. Again, flow chart down there. Okay, so seller comes back and seller says, nah, I'll fix the roof. You're right, that needs to be fixed, but I'm not gonna put in a whole new carport because or whatever. Or whatever. They don't agree to everything on the RE10. So now what happens? Okay, well, the seller can accept the property without any items repairs. They can continue to negotiate. They can terminate. Basically same concepts. There's just, as you walk through it, lay this next to the RE21, familiarize yourself with what the 21 says, familiarize yourself with those three time frames, which is buyer's, time frame, seller's time frame, and then what happens after seller responds time frame. This is color coded to try to help with that, the blue, the green, and the white. There's some little footnotes in here. And what everybody's saying in the comments is, this is amazing. I'd like to take credit for it. I cannot. I had nothing to do with it. Somebody else did, but they did a good job coming up with it. And it will be available to all members free of charge from the realtors. I know that it's going to be out there everywhere. They're going to send it around. So probably on the website. I'm assuming they're going to upload it to your forms library. Maybe I don't know if Melissa's on here and can comment, but they're gonna blast this out and get this out everywhere. So hopefully it helps you out. Okay.
For what I can say, Jason, yeah, we will hit this on all fronts, probably early next year when the form changes come out and that those releases come out in the pipeline. So stay tuned for that. We'll also send out announcements for when that's coming out.
Yeah, I would imagine that you guys, IR's pretty good at meeting you guys where you are. So this should be everywhere and all over. We've got 5 minutes left. I do want to touch on something before we sign off. Nick, can you pull up the lead-based paint form? Just to touch on this super quick, the lead-based paint form was not a form authored by IR. We did not create this for decades. This has lived in the form system, but it was drafted by the federal government. It is a federal government form. The federal government came up with it and you used it forever. Just recently, the federal government decided that they had to change it to add some sections to the bottom. And so, Nick, if you'll just blow up that highlighted part there where it talks about agents, acknowledgments, the federal government added a line in this G, and it talked about how purchaser's agent had informed the seller of seller's obligations. Right there, your radar should be going off. Wait a minute. Why am I, as a buyer's agent, talking directly to a seller that's represented by their own agent? You should not do that. But yet, that's what the federal government form said you should do. We actually had some conversations with the feds on this and said, wait a minute, why did you make this change? How did you get there? Why do you think this is important? How do we comply with this, but then keeping in with the agency of everybody having their own representation? And ultimately, the form was changed, not the federal form, the Idaho form. This will live in your forms library now. That's what that will look like, and hopefully help you. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. I'll just say that the federal government felt that when you get into a cooperative situation and there's money that comes from seller to a buyer's agent, that now makes that agent somehow responsible to the seller. That's how they got there. You say what you want to say about that logic. But we kept in mind with what the federal government wants, which is for purchase agent to do something to make sure sellers got, sellers acknowledged. So here's a tick box that says purchaser's agent working by and through seller's agent has ensured that the seller is informed of the seller's obligations. And by the way, look at the line immediately above this. What does it say? And it's going to be ticked by the seller's agent. It says seller's agent has already informed the seller of seller's obligations, yada, yada. Okay. In the one thing I would say here is something the feds may have gotten distracted with on this was maybe a FSBO situation where you're representing a buyer and you're not representing the seller. Obviously, in those types of circumstances, you want to let a seller know, and you're going to because you're going to advocate for your buyer. Hey, my buyer's going to be buying this house. Is there lead-based paint in there? You got to disclose this. Here's the forms. Here's the brochures. So that was a change that you're seeing there. Hopefully provides a clarity because I think what was written in there, I know what was written in there was causing all kinds of questions because we got a lot of calls about it all over the place. So hopefully that clarifies that. So Nick, that brings us to the end of our webinar.
Yep, we are out of time, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today. Jason, thank you so much for walking us through all of that. We are going to be doing a review of this recording and, sharing it with you guys as we can. As Jason stated, this is all proprietary for us, so we're going to make sure we review this and make sure that it's good to go, send out and give you guys a little preview on our website when we can. Otherwise, let us know if you have any questions. If we didn't get to your question today, feel free to send it to us, and if we can't answer it, we will. Jason, any final thoughts?
No, just there was a lot of information to cover. I talk fast anyway. Hopefully I wasn't blown by everybody, and hopefully you learned something from it. And if you liked IR giving you a sneak peek, let them know. And be aware that these things are far enough down the track that this is not an opportunity for you to say, hey, by the way, can we change this? That ship sailed. But if you have an idea, definitely submit it for the 2026 review, and the Forms Committee will consider it.